Alright guys, so we're going to start our shopping list application, and what I want to do in this particular video is at least get it so we can add something in here like milk. We can click add item and then it gets added to the list here. And that milk didn't just get added, it was already there. You see if I reload, these are hard coded in the HTML. Ultimately we want to get rid of the hard coded items and just have the ones we enter here. Now we're starting with just the HTML and the CSS. You can see there's no JavaScript, so you can get these files in a few places. You can get them in the course, the resources for in the intro for the project. You can get it in the JavaScript sandbox, or you can go to the project GitHub repo. And just to go over the HTML real quick, in the head we are linking Font Awesome. We're using the Font Awesome CDN to get the CSS so that we can have these icons. And then in the body we have a container, a class container wraps around everything. The header has the image and the h1. Then we have a form that has a single text input and a button. And the form has an ID of item form and the input has an ID of item input. Then we also have the filter input, which is not inside of a form because we're not going to submit it. We just want to be able to type in here and have it filter this list. Okay, and then underneath that we have the unordered list, which has an ID of item list, and each list item has the actual text, and then it has a button with the icon inside of the button. And then lastly we have the clear button at the bottom. So that's the UI, pretty simple. So what I want to do first here, like I said, I want to be able to submit this form, but I want to just bring in all of the things that we're going to need for this functionality, and put these elements into variables at the top. And we're putting them at the top in the global scope so that we can access them from multiple functions. So let's get the form first. We'll say item form. We'll set it to document dot. And if you can use query selector if you want. I'm just going to use get element by ID because all these do have IDs, and this has an ID of item dash form. Okay, so that'll bring in the form. Then I also want the input, so that's item input as an ID, and then for the variable we'll say item input as well. Then we want the item list, so let's say item list and set that to has an ID of item list as well. And then I believe that's all we need for now. And then down at the bottom is where I like to put the event listeners. So what we're going to do is listen on the form, so let's say item form, and then we want to add an event listener, and we're going to listen for a submit. So let's pass in here a string of submit, and then we'll have a function called add item. Now I might change function names and stuff later on because I do want to refactor this. For instance, we'll probably put these event listeners inside of an initializer function, an IFI, and I might change some of these event function names as well. But we'll refactor as we go, and I'll explain why I'm doing that. So let's create our function called add item, and you can use an arrow function if you want. I'm just using regular functions for this. Pass in our event object, and since we're submitting a form, we're going to have to call prevent default on that event object because we don't want the form to actually submit to the file. We want to basically stop that and then do whatever we want to do. So I want just some very basic validation. So we'll say validate. Let's say validate input, and I'm just going to do an if statement here. So the input we can access with the variable item input. Now that brings in the element, right? We need the value that's typed in, so we want to access the value property, and we want to say if that is equal to nothing, then well, we need to tell them, we'll alert them to add something. So we'll say please add an item. Okay, and you can create your own custom boxes, alert boxes and stuff. It looks much better, and we'll be doing that in another project, but for this we're just going to use a basic alert. And then we want to make sure we just return because we don't want anything else to happen. So outside of the if statement, let's just do a console log of success. So now I'm just going to open the console up. If I just click this without inserting anything, I get an alert. But if I put something in here like milk, then we see success. All right, now we'll get rid of this console log, and what we want to do next is get the value that's being typed in, which is going to be this item input value. And since I need it down here, we might as well put this into a variable. So let's change this to, let's say, new item. And then up here, we'll say const new item and set that to item input dot value. Okay, and then down here, we'll go ahead and we need to create, we'll just say create list item. And you don't have to put these comments in. I'm just doing it so it's more clear, you know, what I'm doing. So let's see, we want to create a new element. And what we're doing from here on, we've actually already done in a past video. We just did it in a function that ran right away. Here, we're putting it into an event listener, and we're using this text. So the element that we want to create is going to be a list item, and we want to put this into a variable. Whoops. So list item equals that, and then we're going to want to have the text inside of that. So let's take that list item and let's append a child. So append child, and we're going to put in here a text node, which we can do that with document dot create text node, and the text is going to be that new item variable. And to look at that, we could just do a console log of this new list item that we're creating, and you'll see now we have a list item with that text. Now, in addition to the text, if we look at the HTML, we're also going to need a button and then an icon inside of that button. So we could do this a few ways, and I showed you this in a past video. We could put it all in this function, or we could have separate functions to create the button and the icon. So that's what I'm going to do, is have separate functions. Ultimately, I want to be able to here say const button equals, and then a function called create button. And then that's actually going to take in the classes for the button. So that would be these right here. So we can actually take those and just put those in there. All right, now let's create this create button function. So you want to make sure you go outside of the add item function, and then we'll create a new one called create button. And that's going to take in classes. And we're just going to simply create a new button. So we'll say button equals document dot create element, and that element's going to be a button, of course. And then we want to add the classes, so we'll say button dot class name and set that to the classes. Okay, then we can return, whoops, that doesn't need parentheses, return the button. Now, if I do a console log up here of button, let's just submit something here and submit, and you see we have the button, but nothing's in it. We want the icon to be inside of it. So what I want to do is create another function to create the icon, just to break it up. So we'll say create icon. Again, we'll just pass in classes. And then we just want to create a new variable here called icon. We'll document dot create element, and that's going to be an I tag. And then we want to set the class name. It should be I dot class name, and we're going to set that to the classes that are passed in. Okay, and then we can just return the icon. And then up here, right before we return the button, we just want to append that icon. So let's say const icon equals create icon, and then we just want to pass in the classes, which are going to be these right here, these two classes. So we'll grab that and paste that in there, and then we simply want to take the button and we want to append child, and we're adding the icon into the button. So now if I submit and we just take a look, whoops, what's going on here? I is not defined. Let's see. Oh, should be icon. All right, so let's submit this, and now you see we have the button, and inside of it we have the icon. All right, so now we just need to add this to the list item, right? So back up here, instead of just console logging this, let's add it. Let's say li, and then we'll append child, and we're going to add the button. All right, so now we can console log the list item, and that should have everything in it. So submit, we have list item, we have the text, we have the button, and we have the icon. So now we're ready to add it to the DOM, which is very simple. Same thing, we're just going to use append child. So let's take the item list, let's use append child, and let's pass in the list item. And then the last thing I want to do is just take the item input and take the value and just clear it. Just set that equal to nothing. All right, so now let's X that out and let's put something else because we already have milk in there. So we'll say juice, and I click add, and then it gets added. All right, if we put cheese, we put, I don't know, batteries. So now we can add as many items as we want. Now, if I reload, of course, those are going to go away because they're not getting persisted anywhere. They're just getting added to the page. Once the page is repainted or the page is refreshed, then it goes away. Now, like I said, we're going to be adding these items to local storage later, so they do persist. But right now, they're just going to go away. Now, in the next video, before we get to deleting and clearing items, I want to show you how we can get our project set up with Git, which is a version control system, and also push our Git repository to github.com. And this is optional. You don't have to do it right now, but you will need to learn at some point how to work with Git.